Do you think that Congress, since the Supreme Court's ruled that the president can't do it, but Congress can, do you think Congress should forgive the student loan debt out there?
Well, I think forgiveness is probably the wrong route to go. I think, I had this discussion with someone else about there are people out there who feel like they've been scammed and they've been led down this path and maybe a little upset that they're not going to have their loans forgiven. And now the Supreme Court says, no, the president and the administration can't forgive the loans. And they're kind of ticked off. Saying, well, what is anybody going to do about this?
And welcome, everybody, to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, I'm your host, Andrew Cooperrider, and today I'm joined by Dr. John Garren, PhD in economics.
All right.
What did you say the term was at UK when you retire? What do they call you?
Emeritus, Professor Emeritus.
Professor Emeritus.
Sounds pretty fancy for being retired.
Do they still make you go teach classes?
Oh, no. They don't let you. You're retired.
So, but I asked you in today because we obviously recently we had a Supreme Court ruling regarding the college loan debt forgiveness.
Right.
And, I felt, obviously I know you pretty well. We've known each other for a few years, but with your mix of economics background mixed with your involvement in the universities, I thought it was a good opportunity for us just to kind of talk about college education as a whole. Okay. What's going on in our college education? Why? Let me state the obvious. You're a little bit older than me.
Yeah, that's pretty clear.
Okay. How much was college when you went?
Oh, gosh. Well, this was a long time ago. This is in the 70s. I think it was about $600 a year. That was for, Do you know
tuition. What that is with inflation?
You probably have to multiply by about 6 or something like that.
Let's see. What year was that?
That was in 72 through 76.
Okay, hold on. I'm going to check that, but go ahead. So it's $600 a year?
Yeah, about that. And then, of course, plus books on top of that. And then it didn't include, any residence or anything, any food or anything.
So that is equivalent to about $4,300 today. So would you say times 6?
I think. We'd have to look that up, but I was just trying to figure out the CPI.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
It's been up a lot recently, too.
It has.
Yeah. So the equivalent of $4,400, right?
3,600, right? Times 6?
Around there. It'd be right around about 4,000, let's say.
Yeah.
It is, about 8,000 a semester now? What college did you go to? UK?
University. I went to University of Washington out in Seattle.
Okay.
And
is that a D1 school?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, so it should be pretty similar then.
Yeah.
Were you out of state too?
No, actually, I grew up out there. My family moved out there when I was a kid, and
so in-state tuition $4,000 a year.
About
UK in-state tuition.
I think it's about for 2 semesters all year. I think it's about 13 or 14,000.
So
yeah. So it's gone up.
Yeah, a 400% increase after accounting for inflation, right?
Well, what did we say? 4,000? Yeah, it's
So
more than 3 times.
Why is that?
Well, that's a good question. And
what's the economy of college?
Even if our figures aren't quite right, there's a lot of more careful, less back of the envelope kind of calculations that show that higher education tuition has gone up much faster than the rate of inflation. And, there's a host of factors, one of which people have talked about is the increase in financial aid, which drives up demand for higher education. And some of that increase in demand shows up as a higher price.
Right. So you said financial aid increasing demand.
Grants and
Okay. So it increases.
More people want to go to college if they get financial aid or loans and the like. And that increases the demand. and this is kind of basic demand and supply, then suppliers can charge higher prices. And in fact, there's been some fairly careful studies of this about how much of this increase in college tuition is demand driven by not just, I mean, there will be some natural increase in demand. People get wealthier and they want their kids to go to college now. But some of it's been driven by the increase in financial aid. And some studies have suggested, and these are reputable outfits like the Brookings Institution, which is really kind of a center-left think tank, but they normally do pretty careful work. They suggest that something like, I think the number is 60 to 75% of the increase in tuition is due to the increase in financial aid.
Does that count student loans, things like offering of student loans?
Yeah, they count, although it's different than just getting a flat grant, right?
Sure.
But it does make it easier for people to go to college. And historically, there's been a case made for loan programs because it is a significant upfront expense, even when tuitions are lower. And low-income families may not be able to front that upfront. And so the case has sometimes been made, well, this is, and it's hard to borrow on your own earning power in the future, right? It's not a collateral, you can't collateralize that, right? Although there are ways you can, but they're illegal now. I mean, there used to be, the Army does this, and the certain military services do this. We will pay your tuition, but we got you for 3 or 4 years after you're graduated. It's called, I mean, the fancy term for this is kind of an old-fashioned term, is indenture. Mm-hmm. And of course, indenture is incredibly different from, it is incredibly different from slavery, right?
Sure.
It's a voluntary agreement. And slavery is not. But in fact, that's the way that, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people came to the United States in the 19th century. It's through an indenture where they, you pay my way, I have to work for you for 3 years or 5 years or whatever it is. And anyway, I'm kind of, we're getting off topic.
No, you're fine.
I guess
we've got all the time in the world. We've got all the time. Don't feel rushed at all. I don't care how long this is.
So, in fact, so this would be a way to finance college education is through indenture contracts. Although, when you say that, you sound like some miserable lout, but the military does it.
Yeah.
And in fact, there were these programs that I think it was medical student programs where they would pay federal programs that would pay a student's way through medical school if they agreed to go work in rural areas for 3 years.
Do they still offer? I feel like they still offer that for teaching degrees. Do they?
I'm not sure.
If you go to underserved areas and agree to do that, you can. Yeah. They'll pay for part of your cost. I don't know.
I'm not. They might, but. The point is that, these are basically indenture contracts that the United States government offers.
And private employers, too. I mean, you go into certain things. I know, for example, in the engineering fields, especially, you can go get an internship your second, third year in, and you can sign a contract saying, I'll work for that company, and then that company agrees to pay your prior college and the rest of your college, but you have to work for us for X amount of years, or a friend of mine.
And then if you quit, you have to pay it back. Right?
Yeah. And a friend of mine, I mean, while it wasn't upfront, having graduated college was, one of her bonuses was to have her nursing school paid off for working for the hospital. Mm-hmm. This hospital will pay off your nursing, your college debt over, and pay for your college there. So, I mean, that's certainly there. But what is...
Well, I guess what I was driving at here is this would be an alternative way to finance a college education without getting a loan. Without getting like a regular bank loan or a loan through the government. But for whatever reason, I think those are, there may be some legal issues with those that have to be contended with indentured type contracts. But for whatever reason, federal subsidized loans have been a very popular program to get more students to go into college. And that obviously increases the attractiveness for that. There's a case has been made for people, this helps people who normally would have a hard time financing it to get through college, and then they have enough money to pay it back. For whatever reason, that seems to have been abused in the last maybe decade or two, where people are kind of assume that it's always going to work out. I go to college, it'll work out, so I'll get a loan. But anyway, the studies by Brookings and others have showed that this kind of aid, as well as direct, grants, has basically been that aid has been sort of shifted into the price of not all of it. It's like 60 to 70% of that shows up as higher prices of college education, higher tuition.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why higher education prices have gone up. I think also, and I don't have any careful study of this I can cite, but there's been a massive increase in bureaucratization, if that's a word,
yeah,
of higher education. More and
You're
more,
talking about growing the administrative side of college, kind of like we've seen in public education too, as well.
Right. And I just have sort of seen this happen.
Yeah.
While being in the middle of the beast, so to speak. There's just more and more administrative stuff that happens now, and a lot of it is in response to federal and state regulations. That you've got to have a certain program, and you have to have a staff person to oversee this, or these various regulations. And that's another reason. I don't know how much of that accounts for the increase in tuition, but it's got to be something.
So when we look at for an example, take the college loan forgiveness argument, and one of the things, is why is the government, and we're saying forgiveness. We're not saying that the government has to quote unquote cut a check at that moment. They're forgiving money, right? Why is it that we have a federal government that's in a position to be able to quote unquote forgive? They're in a position to null and void these student loan contracts. And why are they in that position? And obviously, I mean, we know that them saying, well, this loan's forgiven, that doesn't, that liability is still being held on the balance sheet somewhere, obviously, right? Like that money's been paid out. That's counted in our revenue models. So obviously we have to make up those revenues somewhere else, so on and so forth. But why is the federal government in that position to even forgive college loan debt?
Well, I think the Supreme Court said that they're not.
Well, they said Congress could, though. They just said the president couldn't.
That's right.
But Congress could come in and null and void, seemingly.
That's what it seems like.
Individual contracts between a person who obviously issues the loan and the borrower, because obviously when you go and you get your student loan, you're not getting it directly from the federal government. I think
you
some get it from some
a good bit. Yeah, I think it was. It largely went through banks, where the federal government would subsidize it. But and I haven't looked at the details of this lately, but my understanding was a lot of that was clawed back. So the federal government was actually acting like the bank, and not just subsidizing the loans that the banks put out. But anyway, there is some liability that has been incurred. That the loans have been made, the money has been spent.
Right.
And with the expectation it's going to be paid back, whether it's a bank or whether it's the federal government.
Does the government getting involved in that student loans at all, does that affect You think has that affected the price of college? Where they're backing these loans, where you're not, the universities or the private banks, for an example, where they don't have to worry about your actual ability to pay it back. That's not of their concern because they know they're going to get their money from the federal government one way or the other. You think that's caused a large increase in what we've seen?
Well, you would think it would. Now, I'm not sure how much backing the federal government would provide a private bank,
right?
In terms of guaranteeing the loan or not.
Well, you're not allowed to get rid of it with bankruptcy, right? It's the only debt that you can't bankrupt yourself out of,
right?
And that's a federal regulation that was passed.
So you would have to pay that back if you're under bankruptcy. So that would shore up the viability of the loan, right? But I think just the fact that the loans are available and are available at lower rates than otherwise due to federal subsidies, that makes it more attractive for students to go to college, and that increases the demand. Some of that increase in demand is going to show up as tuition increases.
Right.
And that's kind of the Brookings study, and some other places have done that. Now, I've heard, I guess, that, and I don't have a hard evidence on this, but that, loans and grants, of course, grants is a freebie, right? But a loan, there's an expectation you pay it back, push hard. Well, go to college. You got to go to college. Here's a loan. Got to go to college. Here's a loan. We'll take care of it.
UK can't fire you, right?
They can't.
Oh, okay.
I'm not speaking of UK, by the way.
I know. I'm just, I've got a
question
for you. I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Is college a scam now these days?
No, but I think, there are people who have argued, young people,
right,
in this group of 25 to 35 who've taken out loans and having a hard time paying them back. They will argue they've been scammed by being convinced that they should go to college, take this big loan, don't worry about it, it'll be great.
Right.
And it's not. It turns out, no, it isn't great. And I think there's people who think they feel like they've been scammed by, quote, the system, whatever that means. But and I think that there are, you can sort of point to things that you see out there. Yeah, it looks like that's been pushed.
Right.
Go to college, it'll solve all your problems. And, there's plenty of people in higher education who understand that that's not the case. That it's not for everyone. Every major doesn't have a good job prospects.
Well, I mean, I guess that's what from an economist standpoint, right? Take a look at, I don't know, let's say a women's studies degree, right? If you're in a traditional marketplace, if you are cutting a loan for something, you either quote unquote have collateral, or you believe you will be able to make your payments on that loan.
Right.
Now, I personally wouldn't make a loan to somebody if I had all the money in the world. I wouldn't make a loan to somebody to go study women's studies at a university just because I don't quite understand what your earning potential is.
Right.
After that, I mean, obviously, you can go get a job at the federal government that just requires you to have a degree, or state governments that have that.
Right.
But outside of that, I don't. I personally wouldn't cut it. Now, are banks? Why aren't banks looking at, as they're making these loans for these degrees, as you're hitting upon, there's certain degrees that just aren't good degrees to get, and it's because it doesn't relate to higher earning potential.
Right.
Why are banks cutting loans for you to go get that degree?
Yeah, I don't know.
And why are colleges offering them?
Well, I think if
economics degrees, why do they offer that? I'm just kidding.
Okay.
I'm kidding.
I know. Normally, as you say, when you make a loan, if you expect to be paid back, you're okay, right? If you have strong expectations it's going to be paid back, I'll make the loan. And banks typically really want to know what you're going to do with the money, because that affects the likelihood of getting paid back.
Right.
But if I think, you're going to pay me back, okay, if you're a trustworthy person, here you go. Take the money, you'll pay me back. And so I don't know what's going through the minds of banks in this. Now, federal government, when they make the loans directly, they don't have the same incentives as a bank, because they're not a private entity, and their existence doesn't depend on the flow of loan payments back into their coffers. So I can't speak to what is going through the minds of banks that have made these kinds of loans. I do think the Steve Beshear administration and certainly the Obama administration pushed college really hard. That's good. Just the public relations. Go to college, Well,
I think
we'll figure out a way for you to get to college.
Obama, he probably, if I'm not trying to speak for him, but I'm going to. I think he has a crisis of. I think that's a crisis of a savior complex almost. Like, follow me here, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Obama grew up pretty poor, right?
Oh yeah,
and knew a lot of people who were poor.
Mm-hmm.
My parents, similar situation. They grew up very poor white Appalachia, like very poor white.
Mm-hmm.
And, you get out and you look around and you say, why did I succeed and why didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's people are sometimes uncomfortable with saying, maybe I just worked harder or maybe I just thought differently, or maybe I recognize some issues, and they say, why is it that I was able to get out and they weren't? And I think people like Obama and even take my parents' generation.
Mm-hmm.
I think they looked at that and they said, well, it was a college degree. That's what made the difference. And so they view that, and this is, I think, a common talking point from the left that I hear often, is that college degrees are your gateway to getting out of poverty, that college should be a guaranteed human right, and everybody needs to be well educated because they believe that suddenly people will earn more money or what have you by getting that college degree. I don't think that's the case. And obviously, there's a lot of other options for people outside of college.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a great grand secret that I didn't graduate college with a bachelor's, but, obviously, employ dozens of people and live a comfortable life as far as that goes. But my point being is that I think that's like a savior complex crisis, where you don't feel comfortable just saying, maybe I don't want to say I'm just better than everybody else, but they just don't feel, I think it's a guilt thing. I think that's why too, I see like these millionaires and billionaires, especially ones like, the Bill Gates, the Jeff Bezos types, where why do they push such communistic, socialistic ideas? And I think it's because they also feel guilty because they look around they say, why is it that I have billions of dollars and that guy struggles to pay his bills?
Yeah.
And I think it's very difficult for them I think they're almost uncomfortable saying, well, I accomplished something, but at the same time, they know it intrinsically, and that's why they believe they can solve everybody's problems. If that makes sense.
Well, it could be, yeah, and it's hard to get into people's heads, but yeah, this is possible. But I do think this mentality of getting a college degree is your ticket to success has been out there for a long time. It's not just Obama.
No.
I mean, his administration sort of verbalized it through public relations, and the Steve Beshear administration as well. But it's been out there before them. It's not all them, but I think that, and it did seem to be a ticket for a lot of people's success for a long time. But things are different, I think.
I think the internet really changed that.
It could be.
Because, it used to be, obviously you go to a library, right? Yeah. But, you're sitting at your desk at work and you need to figure out. I'm trying to think of something. You need to figure out. I don't know, a mathematical formula for something, right? You're an economist. You probably do some math occasionally, right?
Yeah, I do.
You need to figure out a mathematical equation. Well, going to college meant that you had been exposed to that equation, and meaning that you already had that knowledge. You could sit down and do that equation, find your answer very quickly. But nowadays, if you face me with the same problem, I can just Google what's the mathematical equation that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And though it may take me a little bit longer, I'm still able to access that information pretty quickly. And I think that kind of, I think that kind of really changed it, because it used to be before the internet that the paper meant you actually knew something that there's no way anybody who didn't have that paper would know.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays, unless you're like a doctor or, a lawyer, anybody can become an expert in almost anything.
Yeah, if you work at it.
Yeah, if you put enough time into it.
There's a lot to that. I do think, though, that the types of things that college at least should teach, sort of, logical thinking and literacy, advanced literacy, you'll be able to express yourself and write well and whatnot and do research. That's... it doesn't always happen in some majors very effectively, but I think there's other types of knowledge, that are kind of mechanical ability and that sort of thing that is more hands-on. And there's always going to be jobs, I think, for that kind of skill, and you don't really learn all that much in college. So college is not suited for every type of job, and I think to pretend that it is we're just, colleges would be shooting themselves in the foot to claim that they're the end all be all. I did this. This must be about 15 years ago. Radio show for excuse me, the UK campus radio station. It was about similar topics. Is college worthwhile?
Yeah.
This has been around for a little while. This issue
debate.
Yeah, and about loans and whatnot. And I was on there with two other people. I can't remember the third one, but one of them was a recruiter for UK, and nice lady. And I was pleasantly surprised by what she had to say about. Basically, said, "Yeah, you may be a person who your parents own a business, and you like the business, and you know a lot about it, and you'd like to go into that business. Well, maybe college isn't for you. Maybe you've got a good path that for a career that you can make money at, you're satisfied with, and maybe college isn't for you." So I thought, wow, that's actually a refreshing attitude that a college recruiter would take. So I think this knowledge that college isn't suited for everyone has been known for a long time, but I think have really seen it in the last decade or so, where there's, I'm going to say kids coming out, 20-year-old, they're kids to me anyway, coming out with a degree that there really isn't a viable path for them to make a good living and to comfortably pay back their loans.
Do you think, as a professor, former professor, so retired professor, and as a economist, do you believe our current college system is broken?
Well, in some ways, yeah. I think in some ways it's still really good. I think there's still a lot of brain power in major universities that are effective at conveying their set of knowledge to students, and some of it is just entirely non-ideological. Chemistry, physics, biology. There's a finance, accounting, and so on. There's a sort of a non-ideological side to economics as well, right? It's just kind of, here's the basic models. And so I think there's a lot of that out there. that is, in many cases, effectively taught and conveyed to students. I think that the system that it's embedded in is problematic. It's become very bureaucratized. And I'm not speaking just of any campus in particular, but the system as a whole is very bureaucratized. We are not very market driven. We are to some extent because political forces affect public universities.
Why do you think colleges can get away with not being market driven?
Well, a lot of their revenue base comes from state government. Tuition, even though it seems high, is probably underpriced for most people. What did I say? It was like 13 or 14 grand for UK, full, just tuition only. Mm-hmm. And that's what some of the better private high schools charge. So it costs more to run a university.
Yeah, that's what my son's
school.
Private school costs about a year, about 12 grand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It costs more to run a good university per pupil on average than it does a high school. So, and there's an expectation of different expectations of college faculty members than high school faculty in terms of keeping current with their profession and the like. So, and that involves research, going to conferences and whatnot. But
so you think college should cost more, but because the states and federal governments are subsidizing it so much, the price, especially in-state tuition, doesn't actually reflect what the true cost of that student is.
I doubt it. I think it's probably substantially below. So we're in this odd position of needing state money or donors or grant money to fund the enterprise, and not as sensitive to student demand, so to speak, or family. Where is it that students find it valuable? And of course, these things are not just you poll 18-year-olds and say, okay, what's valuable to you,
yeah.
Right? That universities have a role in trying to figure out what ends up being valuable to people,
right?
And not only
a lot of times too in colleges, the customer and the consumer are two different people. The customer is the parent, but the consumer is
That's right.
the student. Right.
And it's the parents as well as the expectation, the future person, the student in the future. We want students, when they're out 10 years, to look back and say, yeah, that was a really good experience. I see how that's valuable now. And of course, maybe that then affects how they feel when they become a parent about what they want their kids. But so this, I think, kind of figuring out what's good for the student is partly, what the parents value as well. Mm-hmm. It's not just, you don't take a poll of 18-year-olds when they walk in and say, what do you want to major in? You set up these programs. And you set up programs where not only there's some skill sets that are conveyed, like in accounting and thinking skills, but things like this is traditional liberal arts education. You get a more deeper background in where why is the world the way it is, and what kind of forces produce that, and how do you get along with people in the world where we have these these widely varying cultures and whatnot, and where did they come from, and so on. So I think having putting those all together in an education system is, people who've been through this a lot, experienced academics, can put that together. Mm-hmm. But I think fundamentally, you need to get customers who are willing to pay for it. And now with right now, our customers are a lot of them are students who don't pay the full freight, and the state government, who provides a lot of assistance, and other non-student, federal government programs and whatnot. So those have become our customers, and not the students and their families so much. And so, just like any other organization, I mean, we have to pay attention to we, meaning higher education as a whole. Are we getting enough revenue in to pay our costs? And so, the revenue flows, you have to pay attention to that, and it's substantially distorted away from the student tuition.
Do you think that Congress, since the Supreme Court's ruled that the president can't do it, but Congress can?
Yeah. Do
you think Congress should forgive the student loan debt out there?
Well, I think forgiveness is probably the wrong route to go. I think, I had this discussion with someone else about there are people out there who feel like they've been scammed and they've been led down this path, and maybe a little upset that they're not going to have their loans forgiven. And now the Supreme Court says, no, the president, the administration can't forgive the loans. And they're kind of ticked off, saying, well, what is anybody going to do about this? And I have sort of two reactions to that. One is, one is maybe a little harsh, and the other is trying to be a little more.
Be as harsh as you can.
One is, okay, when you take a loan, that means a loan is a loan, right? That means you pay it back.
Right.
And you should have that expectation. And but the other thought is, if you've been scammed, then that's kind of a tough pill to swallow. If I feel like I've been scammed, I've been loaned this money, and I'm led down the garden path, and I don't have the resources to pay it back, or at least not without substantial scrimping and whatnot, excess, whatever. So should Congress do something about that? And well, maybe, but I think it should be much more targeted. And I'm not quite sure if Congress is capable of doing that, a real targeted.
So when you say, people feel scammed,
right?
One person may say that before we forgive anything, we should figure out why they feel scammed, because you don't solve the problem. This will just keep happening.
Right.
So having been involved with the collegiate system, having, once again, doctorate, economy, kind of a person people would go to ask to solve the problem. How do we fix the feeling, at least, or these people getting scammed? If you could wave a magic wand and say, before we talk about forgiving any loans, we need to permanently fix this problem.
Right.
What do you do?
Yeah. What do you mean going forward?
Yeah, going forward. So you're saying, look, if we're going to do this, we got to make sure it doesn't happen again. I'm not saying you're saying that we should do it. You originally started off saying we shouldn't, but if you're saying, what do we do to make sure we don't have a generation or two of people where a large chunk feel like they've been scammed?
Yeah.
And I'm saying feel, not saying they have been. I'm just saying feel. What do you think we do? What's the magic wand? John, you got a magic wand?
Well, my business is all about, there is no magic wand, though, right?
Okay, but you have one. No, I'm just kidding.
No, but I guess we often imagine that we can change government policy with a magic wand, which is a useful thing to think about, even if you can't do it, right?
Right, sure.
Well, boy, that's a good question. I do think that, I don't have a list here, a bullet point list here.
No, I didn't prep you. I didn't give you this question.
Yeah, I think we have to get out of the business of sort of trying to convince everybody that you should go to college.
Mm-hmm.
People, I mean, there are obviously people who benefit greatly from going to college, but there are people who wouldn't. And so I don't think trying to convince everyone that they should go to college is the right answer. For people who have problems with, resources in order to pay for college, well, gosh, I don't know. It seems like if you say a government program to subsidize loans, going through the banks and saying, okay, if the banks would charge, uncollateralized loan, we're going to have to charge you, 12% or something. Okay, so some outrageous rate that wouldn't be outrageous because it's not collateralized, but a very high rate. Do we have a government program and try to work with subsidized banks so they can charge a lower interest rate? We'll pick up, you charge 4%, federal government pick up the other amount. I guess that's in concept, that's maybe sensible, but when you have a federal government step in and do those heavy subsidies, that typically gets out of control, and we're kind of left with the kind of situation we're in now. So I'd have to think about this a little more carefully about if I have a good policy prescription.
Outside of cutting administrators, right?
Well, yeah, to make college less expensive. Yeah. But even if college, colleges, the costs are too high, but the tuition is too low. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of this paradox where even if you could get rid of a lot of those administrators, but if we expected students to pay full freight for everything, that tuition would go up.
Well, I think a large part of it too. I mean, I know from UK, and I know this from having done work for UK as a company.
Okay.
UK themselves, I think this is any time we have an entity that, to your point, can go to the government or go this. It's almost like they've detached themselves from the economy of limited resources, and they don't figure out how to do things cheaper. For an example, UK and their dorms. They will build the dorms, but then they sell the dorms to a property management company, or they lease the dorms out to a property management company that then turns around and handles the administration of the dorms. Why? Because some person at UK just one day was like, why do we keep dealing with this? Let's just move this liability off the books. It pays cash flow. It looks good on our books. And we don't have to worry about taking care of the dorms. But at the same time, because of that, and it's a similar thing you'll see with craft services at UK and stuff like that, they have, in order to go into these contracts, because they're not handling it in-house anymore, they have to have a guarantee. We will guarantee you will make at least X revenue. And then if those students don't come in, they have to fill in the gap, which is why UK requires all first-year students to be in the dorm and second-year students to be in the dorm, and so on and so forth. Because if they don't have a certain occupancy, they have to make up the difference anyways to the companies that they've entered into these agreements with. Similar thing with a lot of colleges and craft service. I remember, I used to own a restaurant in Wilmore, and, Asbury University's there. And they had, like how at UK they have that K card, or is it called a K card? I think it's called a K card.
Yeah, the student
like card that ties to their dining program. Yeah. They had one for Asbury. And, I'm a restaurant down the street, a few other restaurants. There's only 2 or 3 restaurants in town. We got together and we said, how can we accept the Asbury card? So we went to Asbury. They wouldn't let us do it. Why? Because they were afraid that if they allowed outside businesses to accept their cards, less kids would eat in their cafeteria, and then they would be on the hook for money to their cafeterias that because they're not having enough of these people coming through and using their dining cards there. And so I think that's always a part of it, right? You look at how government does a lot of things that they do, and it's not about saving money. It's about what makes it easiest for the organization to do it. A lot of people make a lot of money. And sometimes I don't anymore. I don't do government contracts anymore, but So a lot of people have made a lot of money off of the government not wanting to handle. I mean, stupid thing.
Right.
Not to go down a rabbit hole, but it's just, I work in commercial cleaning. I have a commercial cleaning company, right? Mm-hmm. The state government is the only entity I have ever dealt with. Government are the only entities I've ever dealt with that will roll their what we call consumables. That's their toilet paper, paper towels, hand soap, trash liners. Mm-hmm. They want us to cover all the costs in our one monthly price. And we have a formula, and that formula protects me from going into my own pocket to pay for that. So I say, hey, how many people do you see in your office? Yeah. Well, I see 80 a day. Well, I now have to assume all 80 are going to use the bathroom.
Right.
And so they end up paying 2, 3, 4 times more. Plus, I make a profit on that because it adds to my bottom line on my invoice. Mm-hmm. So they end up paying 2, 3, 4 times more than they would if they just ordered it themselves from, online, or even just said, hey, here's an account that we have here. Just if you're running low on toilet paper, what have you, order it there. They end up paying significantly more. Yeah. And so because it's easier. It's just easier on their purchaser.
Sure. Well, that's interesting because normally I think of, and I guess a lot of people think of outsourcing government functions when it's possible is actually an efficiency enhancing thing.
Sure.
Because you have a private sector person handling, everything basically.
Right.
Now, but you do have to have someone.
But you have one customer.
You do. Well, yes.
See, when you outsource like something like education, right? And you're doing vouchers. You have choice.
Yes.
You don't have choice
right.
though in the other situation. There's no but
the government agency has a choice about who to select among.
And their choice is not based on price.
Well,
and becomes the price. It's sometimes price, but it's also about who's going to make my life easier.
Right. And so that's the issue there is that the contracts are not oftentimes well managed. That even though the private entity is probably doing their job
for cheaper
and then can charge a lower price to the government agency, but the government agency is probably not carefully monitoring the contract,
or how they bid it out. I mean, a lot of times they want to. You have somebody in government who's dealt with these types of contracts, and then they, instead of coming to me and saying, this was always one of my problems too, instead of coming to me and saying, hey, we want this taken care of. Mm-hmm. What's the price to get taken care of? They'll come to you instead and say, hey, we want you to take care of this, and we want you to use 10 employees to take care of it. And we want you to use this system to take care of it. We want you. So instead of just giving me the problem, let me quote you on how I can solve it. You're coming in and giving me the problem and then telling me how to solve it, and then asking me to price that. Yeah. And I'm like, and there's situations, where you go in where there's new technologies, there's new ways and systems to doing it where, honestly, I could save you quite a bit of money, but you've come in and told me the exact specifications. So, there you go.
But I think in terms of UK outsourcing those dorms, I think was probably a pretty good move. Because you have, these specialists who know how to do this. And, they design, I think our dorms were getting pretty way out of date, and they needed a lot of updating and expansion. And so going outside to the outside marketplace to do that, I think it was really quite a good move.
Well, they built the buildings themselves.
Well, that's right. And they, and so their revenue model, what you're saying is that there was a guarantee, and I think, yes, their revenue models, we would get the revenue from the dorm rooms, or at least a big share of that. Yeah.
So it'd almost be better if, UK completely, do it all over again. If they, not UK, but any college. Mm-hmm. Granted, you got to have housing for your students, but it's almost like stay out of the dorm business. Just let the market build them housing and price housing, and let the person going to your school figure out how to do it. Stay out of the dorm situation if you could.
Yeah, although I guess it would. I mean, the dorms have become sort of in many of the dorms have become kind of they have classrooms mixed in with the dorm rooms, and sometimes they have special things going on there.
Sure.
So, but you can.
Well, you can't do it now. You couldn't untangle it.
No, but you can do that on a contractual basis, say, and which is what UK and a lot of I think universities are doing. So we would like a building built for this purpose, and rather than trying to do it internally. But I can't remember where we were in this conversation. That
we were talking about how to lower.
Yeah.
How do we lower costs for college?
Right. Now the dorm costs I think those are probably pretty competitive now, because we do have a.
Are they? I don't know.
I don't know the numbers, but I have a hunch they are.
I don't think they are. I don't think they're competitive with. I think the competitiveness of the pricing has been taken away because of the requirement you had to go to them. And I would say that I would say, and I'm drawing that conclusion. I have no idea how much it costs, but I'm drawing that conclusion from the fact that they even have a rule saying you had to stay in the dorms. If the dorms were a good value, providing you a good what have you, then it could compete just fine with other marketplace costs for those living situations.
Well, I think that rule, I mean, there's an argument for that rule that you want your freshmen to come in, they're brand new to campus, you don't want them, you want a little more control over what they're doing. But I think that the marketplace for, off-campus housing is pretty competitive, even though it's priced fairly high, but it's competitive. And I think that UK would have a hard time, and the dorm management companies would have a hard time if their rates were way above.
The
local marketplace.
If it was something where a parent looking at it would be like, "Holy cow, that's way too much,"
right?
Or a student, even as they're comparing colleges, I definitely think that drive them away. But I think off campus housing. It's been years since I've been aware, but I believe it's like $400 or $500 a month. Per person?
Down by campus, I think it's much higher than that now.
Well, it's per person. So they'll put four people. So you go to some of these things, they'll have 4 rooms, and then they rent the rooms out individually at $400 or $500 a room.
Right.
And then 2 of the rooms will share bathrooms. So it'll be a 2-bathroom, 4-bedroom place, and they're getting $2,000 to $2,500 a month for a unit there. Which I don't know quite how that compares. I know the UK dorms very well. I know a lot of the campus housing very well. We used to be really big into turn cleaning. So we would turn, I think one year I turned 10,000 student rooms through UK and then through some other places. So, it's interesting.
Yeah.
That marketplace. Anyway, sorry, we got way off track there.
But no, I think being kind of responsive to the marketplace, so to speak, is and having to compete, but having I think that's a real key to kind of keep costs in check and keep good programs out there that are valuable to students in the long term.
Right.
And I think universities have.
You think they should shed some majors?
Oh, probably, yeah. And I think that universities have been responsive to some degree. I mean, I've kind of been in the middle of this, seen some of it happen. There's been much more of a increase in emphasis on placement in the last 15 years, which is a good thing. And I think that's probably just from competition. When a handful of universities start doing more placement, and then parents say, "Oh, yeah, that's a good thing. What are you doing for that?" And so, universities are doing much more in placement. I think universities upgraded their dorms a lot, which is a way to attract students. And but I think there's a ways to go, and in terms of figuring out what's the right mix of things that's good for students in the long term. And I think having sort of really market-based tuition is a real key in that.
Yeah.
Now, you say that, and people kind of, might say, "Oh my gosh, how are we going to afford that?" Because the private school tuition is way, way out there. Although a lot of people don't pay that because they get scholarships and whatnot.
Sure.
But I don't think. Probably, I'm speculating here. I don't think it needs to be that high to have a kind of a market-based tuition.
If you look at, I'd be curious to see how much subsidies something like BCTC, like a community college, how much subsidies are they really getting? Because they have, they don't have much as far as facilities go. They'll generally have one or two buildings, right? Especially too, like when you get into these extension campuses, like, for like the community college, but for like a for like one community, and they'll offer like basic business degrees, and they'll offer some very basic degrees. I think, I would say if the marketplace was there for that, I'm just curious how much subsidies they get, because you look at that and you look at a situation where you have, like, let's say you offer very limited degrees, a general business degree, maybe a general accounting degree, right? To kind of that realm, not really specialized, high yield earning degrees, not that per se, but like I said, like your business degrees, your
kind of I think BCT does things like bookkeeping.
They
don't have an accounting degree.
Yeah, but like a general studies degree, where what you need is a building, some classrooms. Really, you just need a building probably the size of like a high school, with probably even smaller. You don't have to offer sports teams. You don't have to offer dorm rooms. You don't have to offer a cafeteria even. You don't have to offer any of that, just classrooms and teachers. I'd be curious to see what that yearly price, because to your point, while $13,000 at UK is the same price as I pay for private school for my son, they're not getting subsidized by anything.
The private school.
That's
right.
They're not. And so $13,000 is their all-in cost.
Yeah, pretty much.
That includes sports. That includes a dining facility.
Right.
That include, you got to pay a little bit extra for sports, but not, it's a set fee. Like there's not, they're obviously subsidizing parts of that.
And that's more than a lot of private schools are, because they don't have the full, a lot of private schools don't have a lot of sports.
Yeah.
And a lot of other fancy facilities.
Yeah. So I think it's pretty reasonable to say you can send a kid to a private high school in Kentucky, maybe not in Lexington, but certainly there's markets for it, for around $10,000.
Oh, easily, yeah.
And I know you know more about, I know you've taken a good hard look at things like school choice and stuff. We'll have you on again to talk about that. But yeah, $10,000, and which is the all-in cost. And granted, it is more than the adjusted for inflation price that we talked about before. But $10,000 is not exactly an amount that you can't, if you're living with your parents working a job for $10-15 an hour, you can't afford to pay,
right,
without having to go into debt.
Right.
And I think that's key. I think that's an important thing, I think, to look at, that those options. But I feel like people feel pressured, like they got to have that college experience, they got to have the dorms and the D1 football team and and you can't have the D1, baseball team without having a D1 softball team that doesn't nearly pay for itself. Not saying there's anything per se, but you follow me, these sports teams start to cost a lot. It's to a degree. I think, especially too with this, the how players can get paid now. Because the university sports programs would make money off the selling of the likeness and those types of paraphernalia, and that would then the boys baseball team pays for the girls baseball team because they're able to make some sponsorship and things like that deals. But now that the players can get paid for their likeness, I wonder how that affects the ability to continue some of these programs.
Yeah.
That'd be an interesting thing to think about. But anyways,
but yeah, I think that like BCTC, I don't know their books at all, but they do get a state allocation.
I'm sure,
and I don't know how substantial it is, but and their tuition is very low, lower than UK's. And they've begun to offer some more vocational programs. But the thing about that is that my hunch is that there's no particular reward for an entrepreneur, an academic entrepreneur who comes in and says, "Hey, let's start a program.
Yeah,
we'll do vocational stuff." And my understanding is this program is pretty good. They have got private sector collaborations and whatnot.
Sure.
But gosh, can we charge for this? Is a great program. Can we charge 10% higher tuition for this? Well, the answer is no. Can we, pay extra for a faculty member who's really in the middle of all this? And the answer is mostly no. Mm-hmm. And so basically, there's no very little incentive. And I'm speculating a bit about this with BCTC, but I think generally in higher ed, there's very little incentive to do kind of entrepreneurial things. Because it kind of, and so it doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. There's no, we're going to get a whole bunch more tuition revenue for this versus this. No, you don't. Or we can, we can spend extra money and get this real great person who's really experienced at running this, and who can, oftentimes it's hard to do that. So, that's why not being market driven stifles a lot of evolution and innovation in higher ed. Now that doesn't mean it has not happened at all, but I do think it's slowed the pace down tremendously.
Or politics has more so steered it than.
Yeah, politics steers it.
I mean, do you think they only have their vocational program now because there's been such a political push for vocations to get that attention?
Well, I think that's a big factor, yeah. And political pressure is something that matters, but it's very different than economic pressure. Because if you open a Walmart in a small town that has, you get hundreds and thousands of people showing up with their money,
right?
And it happens like that, and you don't have to play the political game of trying to convince a bunch of state legislators or whatever, or local legislators and local community members to
unless
vote.
You need that rezoned.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, you have to do that, but to sort of vote to allow us to open a Walmart, or to apply political pressure to the right politician to allow us to do this. Well, I mean, but ultimately the political pressure does matter, but responding to the economic incentives can happen very quickly, and without all this political. Well,
I think it's harder. I mean, we both know, we're both involved in politics. Political pressure is harder to mobilize. It's harder to measure than an economic pressure. And economic pressure, I mean, we know, you can look at the Bud Light boycott, right?
Yeah.
I mean, while that is somewhat political pressure, but the political pressure is for them to cave or to do things like the transgender beer can stuff. Yeah. But the economic pressure for them is in the opposite direction. And, if I had to guess, the problem they're having right now, outside of the fact that they should have never done it, but anyways, a lot of regret. Anyways, the problem they're having right now is how do we navigate? We've got this economic pressure pushing us in one direction. We've got this political pressure pushing us in a completely different direction. And how do we navigate this? Because, one group is our stockholders, our what do they call them? Stakeholders, whatever they call them, right? Our desire to be well liked at the parties we go to. And then the other one is how do we, our actual customer, that's actually buying
That's right.
the product. And I say the stockholder. I would say this: the Bud Light stockholder is woke because
Stockholder or stakeholder?
Stockholder.
Okay.
And this is why. And this is, I guess, an economic question.
Mm.
The stock price for Bud Light has not dropped very significantly, despite the fact that according to the most recent kind of studies, they haven't released their sales numbers yet for obviously this quarter that we're in, that will end, on the 9th, in the 9th month there, which obviously, that's the 6th month through the 9th. That's a full brute of their last quarter is just towards the tail end. They started getting that, hit there, or I'm sorry, the 3rd month to the 6th month hasn't come out yet. And so as that comes out, I'm sure we'll see it. But I was reading something that said 25% of their customers have full on just stopped drinking Bud Light. Another 25% have reduced the amount they're drinking. And only another 25% has slightly increased. So half their customers have either decreased or stopped drinking it completely. And only half have, and a quarter have stayed the same and a quarter have slightly increased. So the question becomes, why is their stock price hasn't dropped 25%? Should have. They're coming out and saying they've lost 25% of their sales, but their stock price has dropped maybe 5%.
Okay.
And so,
the stock prices, one would expect that to be reflective of the long term, not just right now.
Right.
So I guess maybe there's some expectation that they'll get their house in order and come back to something like what they
I don't
used
think
to
they
be.
will.
Well, I don't know.
Because the problem is, the longer it goes on, right? So follow me here, okay?
Yeah.
So I used to drink Bud Light often, not super often, but often, right? I was not really into Coors or Miller. If I wanted a light beer, I often had a Bud Light, but I never really tried Coors or Miller a whole lot. I guess just culture I grew up in or what have you. My dad drank Busch and Bud Light, so that's what I drank, But now that this happened, I stopped buying Bud Light. I bought Coors for a little bit, and now I buy Miller because Coors still led like a pride parade, and I know Miller probably didn't. I'm like, well, if I'm going to boycott one for this, there's plenty of beers out there.
Yeah.
Point is that now that I've developed a taste for Miller or Coors, I don't have that familiarity thing. It's kind of like McDonald's. Serves awful food. Tastes horrible. Terrible service. Absolutely horrible product. But why are they the busiest fast food restaurant? No matter what. Most often. And Chick-fil-A will too, but I'm talking McDonald's of the cruddy ones. McDonald's. Objective, I think, one of the worst. But why? Well, because it's the familiarity. I know their menu. I know what it will taste like. I know what to expect walking in. But the moment you do something to make me try something else, and I get familiar, especially for months on end, now I get familiar with a different place, I think I'm less and less likely to return. So that's why I think they don't recover. Because I've now I have my taste that I expect to have every time I open a can, and it's now not Bud Light.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's my, I guess, take on that situation. What's your take? You're an economist, right? This is interesting.
Oh, I think, this is kind of, you get into brand images.
Right.
And for whatever reason, people do seem to respond to that. And whether they think it's cool or not, or whether they think it's a, quote, a good company or not, or doing the right things. And people do respond to those kind of things. And I think there's enough people now who are not liking the image,
right,
or, what Bud Light, quote, stands for, end quote, and are moving away from that. So, that's people. And I think that happens when, as a society becomes, richer and richer, so to speak, higher and higher income, that we treat ourselves to that luxury of when poor societies, I don't think, at least not as much, my presumption would be, look, if it's a good product and it nourishes me, I'm gonna
well, how much choice do you have?
Well,
too.
there
And
might
I
be
mean, in a
choice,
poor-
but there
in
might
a
be
poor-
choice, but people don't. Yeah, well, that's right. You don't spend a lot of time and energy trying to build an image. It's just this product is, keep your stomach filled,
Yeah.
give you enough nutrition, and so on.
I mean, in a poor
And-
community, how many supermarkets is there going to be? I mean, there's not enough market demand, or there's not enough, or how many cattle farmers is there going to be? I mean, you would feel like it's a poor society because there isn't a lot of business owners and entrepreneurial people, right?
Well, it could be that they're just at an earlier stage of development, and
That's
that
what I
takes
mean.
a long time to develop that. But there's still competition for products that poor people buy, but low-income people typically don't pay as much attention to these kind of things that higher-income people do. So anyway, that's kind of humans that we do, particularly wealthier. I don't mean wealthy in the sense of Bill Gates, but wealthy in the sense that we got nice houses and nice cars and that sort of thing.
Well, I think too that Bud Light's kind of it's a luxury item in a way, right? I mean, it's not like
I think buying image is a luxury item,
right? But I think I guess what I'm saying is like there's not really for an example, Amazon isn't the greatest company in the world. Certainly very woke, certainly very what have you, right? But your choices are, if you're trying to get a similar service to Amazon, pretty much, is Walmart now starting to compete with them, or Amazon.
Yeah.
And Walmart and Amazon are just as much companies that act in ways I probably wouldn't agree with. Probably Amazon more, but anyways. Point is let's say Amazon comes out and does the same thing that this dilemma of anything. How many people are going to leave Amazon?
Right.
None. Why? Because the difficulty of leaving Amazon is so high because there's only one other option. Walmart's starting to compete a little bit more. They have they partnered with some sort of video offering service, right? So on and so forth. But it's hard. But you take something like Bud Light. Look, there's 3 other beers on the tap.
Right.
There's 5, 6 other light beers of a different brand displayed right next to Bud Light. Yeah. So I think it gives you that. I don't know. I think that the part of the reason why Bud Light sees it is because it's such an easy thing to leave. Like if your electric company goes out and sponsors a gay pride parade, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, it's or Target. The reason why the Target boycott, well, because you do have other choices. You can go to Walmart. Go to the store. Targets aren't generally in underserved areas. But if Walmart did the same thing, they could probably get away with it. Why? Because they are generally in underserved areas, and in a lot of their areas, they don't have competitors. When you take a look at the options, you can either drive another hour to go to a different store, or you can go to the Walmart in town.
Anyway, I think people are sensitive to these image things, whether it's a conservative, liberty, progressive, whatever. People are sensitive to those, and I guess we're probably going to see that. I do think that a lot of the as we are kind of seeing from, I guess indirectly from all this, the lawsuit over with federal government sort of influencing Twitter and YouTube and Google to take down, these posts that they don't like. I think there is a lot of influence with government on various private businesses to act in certain ways.
Sure.
When
you can regulate out your competition.
Yeah.
Or you have to ask government for permission. I mean, if Facebook wants to buy up a company, they have to ask government for permission. If Twitter wants to do the same thing.
And there's this, I've been reading, there's a good column in the Wall Street Journal a few days ago about some of these green contracts that were in the Inflation Reduction Act, the misnamed Inflation Reduction Act. But some of these contracts for green energy, various things, they come with they're grants, subsidies to do certain things, and they come with all these strings that you have to have, like DEI training programs for employees and various other things like that, or else you won't get the grant. So there are these subtle ways in which companies are induced to, I think,
Sure.
take on these more, well, what we would regard as kind of these left-leaning stances in public.
You wonder, not to interrupt, it just crossed my mind. So it's a thing in bidding government contracts that they'll show deference to minority-owned businesses.
Mm-hmm.
You wonder with this affirmative action ruling, how much that affects that.
Well, it could. I mean, there probably would have to be another law. Excuse me, another lawsuit on that.
Right.
But it could very well. So I think the gist of all this, I guess, is that getting a product produced and through relying on political permissions and political pressure is much more difficult than just, hey, you've got an organization, why don't you go try it? Okay, we'll try it, and if we make money, it works, and if we don't, we fold it. And so I think public universities generally, and public institutions generally, are more reliant on political pressure, which works very slowly and awkwardly, and oftentimes not very effectively, rather than on just sort of market-based, economic-based kind of incentives that can work very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get a much slower, I think, evolution of programs in higher ed than would otherwise happen.
If you're politically okay, your economic pressures, especially universities, don't really. I mean, look at KSU.
Yeah.
I mean, they've been bailed out twice now.
Well, more than that over the years.
Several times.
Many times. I mean, I can't count it up, but they've been in. I've lived here 37 years, and I guess they've been in and out of the news almost every 5 or 6 years. They're in and out. Something comes up where they have financial difficulties and mismanagement. And
what do you think? Speaking of the affirmative action ruling, you're from universities. 1, do you disagree with the ruling? And 2, how much do you think it actually affects? It probably doesn't affect UK, but how much do you think it affects college going forward?
Well, I think it will affect UK.
You think so?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I take the 14th Amendment pretty seriously.
Yeah.
Where all persons are what's equal protection, I guess.
Yeah.
And if you start doing stuff on race, I think it's just down the wrong road. Public institutions you can't do it.
Can you talk about what UK you think was doing and affirmative action stuff UK?
Oh, I think kind of what other universities are doing is that. I don't know. I'm speculating, but yeah. I mean, most universities have these affirmative action programs where there's some racial favoritism, and they would say, well, it's for the good of the Commonwealth and so on, or the good of the whatever state you happen to be in. So I think the universities will try to adjust their admissions policies to try to do what they've been doing, but in a not so obvious way.
Do you think you can get in trouble?
Me?
For writing a person? Because you can't indicate your race anymore. So let's say you're trying to...
No, you'll be able to indicate that, but I think admissions are not supposed to be predicated on that.
You wonder... So you think they'll end up looking at... Because I think the general conversation about affirmative action was that you would accept somebody of the right skin color with different standards than you accept somebody with a different skin color. For an example, at these universities where they have a wait list, I don't know if UK really does a wait list thing, but these universities that have a wait list where like the Harvards and those higher end universities where they say, look, basically they're saying, look, we have too many Asian students and not enough other minorities, because of course Asian is a minority.
Right.
But we don't have enough of the other minorities. So we're going to prioritize. We're going to have a different standard for people based upon their skin color, which is innately racist. But putting that to the side. But that was kind of like the big kind of push there. And, is there, do you think there's university pressure for you to pass your minority students over your other students?
I don't think so. Not at that level. No. Well, I mean, I've never felt anything like that.
Okay.
And, but I think that, the university will say, well, we have this holistic admissions process where we consider a host of factors. And it looks like race is one of them. And I think that's where but I guess to really say race matters, you should look at otherwise identical candidates, but they're only different on race and which one gets in. Of course, you probably don't see that exact comparisons very much, but you can still look at the data and say, okay, we can control for test scores and high school performance and so on, and I guess and see there's some pretty obvious favoritism towards one and against others.
Sure.
And I think I have not read that decision other than just read a few stories about it. So as long as race is a consideration, you can't do it. Now, I guess you can kind of proxy it, look for, like in Justice Roberts suggested this, that, if you have an essay about, here's, some experiences I had being discriminated against. And you say, oh, that's a wonderful essay. You're in because of your good essay.
Right.
Well, so, yeah. So, I mean, things like that.
You can still look at it. I mean, you could still make that because there's some court historic, funny enough, on the other side of things where like, oh, you're a racist company and your hiring practices because your makeup of your employees doesn't match the makeup of your hiring field and yada, yada, yada. That's why you have to even ask about race when you're hiring people, which is crazy. But I guess, though, what I'd say is that, and I don't know what your experiences have been. I know some UK professors, and I know some specific ones that would answer this in one way. But do you see affirmative action policies for the hiring and advancement processes at the University of Kentucky, where they advance people based upon their gender or race and not as much based upon merit?
Do you think? So you're asking me if would that change or what?
Well, do you think it changes? Do you think it's an issue now at UK or at any universities?
Well, let me speak generally. I think that in disciplines that are quote where it's underrepresented, not that many women or minorities, I think my impressions are virtually any institution of higher education is under pressure to, or has been under pressure to hire people, these sort of underrepresented minorities, and in some cases it's women, depending on the field. And I've sort of seen that ever since I've gotten to the academic world in the 1980s. So that's been out there for a long time. And now, I think the at least in terms of promoting people, giving them tenure, I don't think that the standards are pretty strict there. So in terms of trying to find people, I think there's been a lot of pressure at virtually all universities to find these underrepresented minorities.
Think that changes with the affirmative action rule?
Well, that's a good question. I think if institutions, it's not just higher education, I think a lot of institutions, if they get the message, and the message is you can't use race anymore, then you would think it would reverse. But this decision was specifically about college admissions, and so, can we still use affirmative action for hiring or for scholarships? Well, again, if you kind of extend the logic, say, well, the answer would be no.
Right.
But I think that it may take more lawsuits to
continue to extend that ruling.
Yeah.
But it provides a basic kind of ground for it.
Yeah.
Any good economy jokes before we cut out?
Good economy jokes. Well, gosh, yeah. I do have some, but you caught me here short a little bit. Let's see here. Well, there's the joke about it's apparently a story. You've probably heard this about the two-handed economist. You know this one?
No.
This is supposedly, the economists always say, well, on one hand this, and on the other hand this, right? This is the joke about economists that we always say, well, this, but this. So apparently, I don't know if this is a true story or not, but apparently someone asked, when he got elected president, they asked Truman what kind of economist he was going to hire for his advising. He said, well, I want a one-handed economist.
That's funny. That's good. That's good stuff. Well, John, thank you for joining us. We'll have to have you on again.
Okay.
Maybe next time we can talk about the economy of school choice. How about that?
Okay.
Right? I know you've done some studies on that.
I have.
Yeah, there you go. We can dive into that. Anything you want to plug?
Not at present.
No books or anything pending?
No.
Okay. All right, John. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you guys for tuning in.